Hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia, and this is the operational report for the Russian operations in Ukraine, or their special military operation in Ukraine, or for what most of the world simply call the Ukraine war. So the Russian forces continue their offensive in the midst of Ukrainian offensive. The Ukrainians have launched their summer offensive. It's still ongoing, it's still on a decently high tempo, and however the Russians are over the past 1-2 weeks suddenly launched their own offensive, and in fact they have now just expanded their offensive over at the Kupyansk front. The Russian forces launched a massive offensive around this Kupyansk front region. This is Kupyansk, and so the Russian forces attacked south of Mysytivka, Sinkivka, at the Vyshana region, Timkovka, and this is I believe Ivanivsky, Kaislivka, Tabaivka. And as you can see, this is basically the entire front that is currently engulfed in fighting. And this information is now acknowledged by the Ukrainian side, that they have acknowledged that the Russians have launched an offensive operation over at the Kupyansk front. And the various reports of fighting is also corroborated based on information coming from different sources, particularly over at the Sinkivka or Mysytivka region. We have information of the fighting south of Mysytivka confirmed by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, and the offensive around this forest region is also confirmed with pro-Russian sources, with Kremlin reported about this. And then we also have information from the Russian Defense Ministry themselves acknowledging of their actions over at Sinkivka as well. And this, coupled with every other information that's coming out from all this region, suggests that this is a full-scale offensive by the Russian forces over at the Kupyansk front. And what is the significance of this region is basically, I can show you in the different mapping. So this is Kupyansk. This is Kupyansk, and there is one major road. This road here is the key that the Russians want to control, and this area from Kupyansk, this crossing over here allows the Ukrainians to continue to send in forces from the Kharkiv region into this area here. And while the Russians have not really been very bothered, it seems like they are not very bothered by all these things, but it seems like maybe the Russians want to close it up, because ideally for the Russians, the front line that they want is actually over at the Oskil region, and so the Oskil River over here is where the Russians really want to hold their defense line, because this is a major river area. It's very hard for the Ukrainians to actually do a crossing in any way. So they really would prefer to have Kupyansk. Holding this front line currently is really difficult for the Russians because it's really long. So it looks like the Russians want to close this up, and maybe concentrate their efforts in defending other regions, or I would think at the Zaporizhia region, and also at the Bakhmut Front, where they are also facing a lot of pressure from the Ukrainians. So this road leads all the way to Novoselivsky and Kuzymivka. This area is where a lot of the heavy fighting is currently ongoing, with the Russians making a major push in this area here. And this Sviatove, this city here, is where the Ukrainians' prime objective is. They really want this, because capturing this, you can see the road networks around here. This is the major hub. This is a major hub. So you can see Sviatove is here, and the roads coming through Sviatove is literally everywhere, and the Russians really want this road to be secured, this road all the way to Kupyansk, and which is why this offensive operations is really where it comes. Because once you close this region here, you can see that there's actually not much crossings in the south. There's one small river crossing over at the Kupyansk Vilovy. There's a railway line over here south of it, and then the next crossing will then be all the way at Sinkove. So Sinkove is all the way on the eastern part of Novoselivsky, where the push is currently slowly ongoing. So if the Russians able to secure everything here, Ukrainians will not be able to reinforce from the north, and they will have to go through everything here, which will then complicate logistics, and the Russians can easily push south and secure everything north from this Novoselivsky line. And this is why this is pretty important for the Russians to attack in this area here, which I personally think that is pretty overdue in terms of strategic division. But maybe the Ukrainian forces have weakened by a lot in this region, which is why the Russians starting to do their offensive. And over the Novoselivsky region, the fighting is still ongoing. If the Russians continue to want to capture Novoselivsky, there's progress in the south, and they are trying to also attack probably in the northern area here. So the current line that the Russians are probably trying to capture is this river line here, the Zerebets River, all the way. I think this is where they want to go to, and then they can capture Semikivka and at least straighten the entire front line along the Zerebets River. So there's a river over here, and the other front line is actually at the Kreminna front, where the Russians make their first offensive, where they try to show how Ukrainians how to do it. The Russian forces attack all the way to Torsky, and they reach the outskirts. There is previous information suggesting that the Russian forces reach all the way at the Zerebets River. This information is invalidated. Remelin, the pro-Russian source, quoted this some Pope guy, I don't know what's the name, and the information cannot be corroborated, so this information is false. The Russian forces did not reach the river, and the Russian forces currently are on the defensive over the Torsky region here as the Ukrainians try to counterattack. The Russians continue to be pushing over the Dibrova region and within the forestry region. They are still attacking Yampolivka. So the Kreminna offensive is definitely still ongoing, with the Russian forces trying to put pressure on the Ukrainians to draw more forces in. The Ukrainians are definitely still resisting and definitely still doing their offensive in this region, just that the Russians pretty much have overwhelmed them in terms of the offensive tide. On the northern part of the Kreminna front, while the Russians are attacking over at the Nevsky region, this is where you can see that the Ukrainians actually are doing the offensive. They are doing their Kreminna offensive as well. However, in the latest information, in a very interesting twist of situation, while the Ukrainians are attacking Kamenzinivka and Novovodian, the Russians seems to have broke through across the river over at the southwestern part of Kamenzinivka. This information coming from pro-Russian source. Ryba reported this. This is still not corroborated yet, but it is interesting to see this breakthrough. It might be just a diversion because as you can see, the main offensive for the Russians is actually in this area here, and in the Kupyansk front and Svatove front, and then in the Kreminna front, which this sudden push in the center is out of character, and it probably just to divert Ukrainian forces to this area here away from the main offensive regions. There is not much offensive over in the Svatove front from the Russian side. There is reports of fighting over the Vasily region, according to information from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. No Russian sources talk about this. And then over at the Bakhmut front, the Russian forces are on the counteroffensive, while the Ukrainians are actually still pushing. It's a very similar situation like the Kreminna front, where the Ukrainians are launching their offensive. Then the Russians decided to just fight fire with fire and launch their own offensive as well. So which actually makes the situation very dynamic, because front lines can change a lot in a single day when both sides are actually attacking. Over at the Bakhivka region, the Russian forces actually counterattack, and they managed to secure the line, and the Ukrainians are currently trying to counterattack to retake and go back closer to Bakhivka. the Russians are also attacking Krychorivka, and this is very interesting because this information is now corroborated by both sides. Both Russian and Ukrainian Defense Ministry confirm that the Russians are attacking Krychorivka. So this is actually unusual because usually it's the Ukrainian Defense Ministry talking about this, and then I would not be too sure because no one else is talking about it. But this time around, we have the Russian Defense Ministry confirming that they are actually launching attacks towards Krychorivka. So this is a very, very interesting development, because why would the Russians want to attack in this area here? And we also have some attacks reported at Orikhovo-Vasilivka. So this attack here will be really curious because the Ukrainians are putting pressure at Bakhivka, but yet the Russians go on the offensive over at Krychorivka. Yeah, it's something very unusual. And in the southern flank of the Bakhmut Front, we have the Russians continue to try to push back. They have managed to create a better buffer zone around Klishchiivka. However, the Ukrainians are still putting pressure, so the Ukrainians are making some progress in the southwestern part of Klishchiivka. Particularly, we have information that the Russians did withdraw a bit around in the southwestern part of Klishchiivka due to Ukrainian artillery bombardments. So the Ukrainians are putting pressure there. The more southern part of the Bakhmut Front is a bit more pressure because the Ukrainians are attacking Kutyumivka. The Russians are counter-attacking around the Andriivka region. However, the Ukrainians are putting a lot of pressure in this area. Losing Kutyumivka can be very disastrous for the Russians as well. I haven't seen information of Russians counter-attacking or talking much about Kutyumivka. Mainly it's the Ukrainian side that is talking about it. As you can see, Russian Defense Ministry simply said that they defended themselves at Kutyumivka. We didn't have much indication of other things. And then the Russians have abandoned their Avdiivka offensive. This is Avdiivka. This Avdiivka. Previously, we have the Russians trying to attack again in this to continue their pincer around Avdiivka. This pincer is no longer happening as the Russians went back on the defensive, particularly over at the Zhivane region and in the Povomaisky region, with the Ukrainians trying to recapture their lost ground, and the skirmish at Povomaisky continues. In the northern part of Avdiivka front, the Ukrainians are the one that is doing on offensive. The Russian forces also are on the defensive. So nothing much to talk about. As for Kreminna and Novomihailivka, yeah, is the usual. There is just skirmishes over there. Russian operations around Zaporizhia front is a bit more interesting in the sense that the Russians are totally on the back foot over at the Velika Novosilka sector. So this is Velika Novosilka, and the Ukrainians are launching massive offensive in this region here with the prime objective of capturing the Russian-controlled Staromayorsky. And the latest information do suggest that the Ukrainians actually have managed to enter Staromayorsky, and they might have some control over part of it, but the Russians have control of most of the town, and they are currently resisting and counterattacking the Ukrainian forces. So this over at the other side of the river, Uruzaine has not been penetrated just yet, so this is still ongoing. I think the Russian forces are going to spend a lot of effort trying to make sure that these do not fall. And on other part of the Zaporizhia front, the Russian forces are making some probings over at Mafopil after their surprise capture of the grounds north of Mafopil, so all the way to the river point just off Shevone. So the Russians are actually making some probing around this area here, not offensive just yet. And over at the Orikhiv sector, with the Ukrainians offensive towards Robotine, so far the Russians have been managed to hold back the Ukrainian onslaught. They managed to hold the line over at Robotine, but the Ukrainians are sending reinforcement, so the Russians are currently probably bracing for more Ukrainian attacks. Otherwise, there is no offensive operations over at the Robotine. The Russians have not launched counter-offensive over this region here. However, what the Russians are doing is actually trying to divert again diversionary attacks. This time around, the diversion attacks is actually at the Shebaki region. The Russians are attacking Shebaki, Mali Shebaki, and around this area here. They are trying to force the Ukrainians to fight in this area here, and there is some probings or some assault around this region here that prompted Ukrainian counter attack over at Velika at Mali Shebaki. So there is also some probing at Pyatikaki, but it's nothing much. The Ukrainians are still pretty much on the offensive in this area here. Otherwise, the Russians are not doing much about the Dachi region here. They kind of given up. They just use mortar and artillery. They do not do any more ground assault to try to recapture that bridgehead that the Ukrainians have somewhat established. So this is the operational report for the entire operations for the Russians across the entire of Ukraine. Mainly, we have the offensive at the KUPYANSK Front, at the Kreminna Front, defensive operation and counter-attack over at the Bakhmut Front, and also defensive operations and some diversionary attack over at the Zaporizhia Front. So that's basically it. And thank you for watching. Let me know your feedback in the description below. Is it too boring? Is it too pointless to do all these things, or do you really like it? Do let me know. I'm feeling very drained, very tired covering the war so far. I think maybe lack of exercise or something. I'm feeling very drained. So yeah, you can probably sense it in the way how I talk. I'm a bit tired, yeah, a bit burnt out. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next update.